Hey guys, kinggath here with Bethesda Mod School. And this first lesson on AI packages, we are going to go over how you use and manipulate the AI package system to make NPCs do what you want. Now, I am in game right now because the first thing I thought to do as a demonstration of what you guys could do with AI packages was modify the AI packages for the starting Concord 5 so that they would stop using the darn hammer markers. So this way we could circumvent the problem rather than having to do things that a lot of mods do where they just delete those markers or disable them, etc. We just went right to the source, went to the AI package and made it so that they won't use them anymore. Now, I'm going to show you guys how to do that, and in doing so, I'm going to walk you through the AI package screen because it's easily one of the most complex systems in the creation kit. So this is going to take a long time as far as number of lessons for this particular system to get through, but no hurry. Just like every other one of the different classes that I've got going in this, we're just going to keep adding to them slowly over time. In fact, on that note, while we're talking about all those other classes, none of those are done. So even though I haven't added a ton to any of them in a while, most of them have been stuck on a certain number. It just happens to be what I'm interested in focusing on at the current moment, due to trying to build up to bigger things. So we'll get back to those eventually. But with all that out of the way, let's head back into the creation kit and start going over AI packages. And I'll show you guys how you can make the same tweak yourselves. All right, so we are in the creation kit now, and I am in the mod that I used to disable them from using the hammer markers. It actually disables them from using any furniture item, but that's not the point. Really, it's just an excuse to come up with something I thought a lot of you guys would like to have. That would allow me to walk you through how you edit a package. So this is one of the AI packages that the Sanctuary or Concord group uses in Sanctuary at the start of the game before you've finished Sturgis's little quest there. So basically what I want to do is walk you through this package screen and show you how you evaluate what the heck is going on with these things and then make tweaks to it. So the first thing to note whenever you open up any of the packages that Bethesda has established here is note up in the upper right hand corner whether it says package or package template. If you're opening up a package template and editing it, you should probably stop and go back. You shouldn't mess directly with the templates. At least I wouldn't recommend it because it'll just have a cascade effect across every other package that uses that template. Now templates are really, really powerful, and I have never made my own yet, so I'm not even going to get into those yet, and they're way too complex to start with. So just know if you check up here, if you see the one you're about to edit is a package template, you need to fix something else to mess with. The next thing we are not going to talk about yet, we're not going to talk about these three boxes right here. We'll get into those with more advanced stuff later. Just know if you run into a package that you're starting to edit that has an owning quest, usually that's because it wants to make use of some of the aliases on that quest. So it's generally going to be a very specific package for a particular quest that's designed to do something. It might be something like the workshop packages will have something like that for settlers. We'll probably have an owner quest set up, things like that. The overrides and the combat styles, those are going to be very specific packages for combat. I'm not going to get into those yet. That's more advanced. I want to talk about in general mostly I want to talk about this package tab, the flag tab and the conditions tab right now, and then we can get into some of the other stuff later. These other three are very rarely used anyway, so I'm going to start with these, and we'll get you guys at least started. We'll call that Basics 101, and then I'll do additional videos in the future on this. So the first thing to note whenever you are messing with a package is the template. This is going to tell you roughly what you should expect from the behavior. Now this list is pretty exhaustive, and it might not be perfectly clear what's going to happen based on these. So this will be one of those things you just learn over time. And to help you guys with figuring out what packages you actually want to mess with, I have a little mod that I've made myself that I use that dumps the current AI package that an NPC is using to a log file, so that way I can learn from that. I can watch when an NPC is doing something. So I will include that mod in the mod school resources, so definitely go grab that, and on the description page I'll walk you through how to use it. It's pretty easy, but just make sure you have that, so that way you can figure out what it is that an NPC is doing at a given time. You can look at their package and try and reverse engineer it from what I'm about to teach you here. So that's how I figured out which package they were actually using to mess with it. So first I want to show you what I edited to make sure that they stopped doing it, and then we'll go over this in particular. So all I did to make them stop using hammers and editing it at all is I took this Sanctuary Sandbox package and the Sanctuary Work package, and to both of them I just took the allow sitting and changed it from I unchecked true. And now they're sitting just means to interact with a furniture object. So it doesn't necessarily mean sit down on a chair. Sitting could mean something like hammering, which in that case is what that was. So that's now, if that's all you want to know is how do I make the mod that stops the hammering, that's how you do that. But let's talk about what these do. So you have your package template. A sandbox generally means they're going to wander within some sort of area and interact with random furniture objects and idle markers that they come across. That's effectively what sandboxing means. So the way this package screen is set up, if you're using a template, it's going to work a little different than if you're not using a template. That's another thing important. So if you're using a template, basically all you can do is pick these little different options right here and change them. So the idea is the package template defines the procedures and behaviors that are going on, and then you can make slight tweaks to them. It's a lot like if you were taking a default script in the game and you were changing the properties on the script. So if you've done any of my scripting tutorials or whatnot, you'll know about those. If you've done anything for Sim Settlements, you'll do a lot of script property editing where you're not defining any of the behavior yourself. You're not necessarily doing any coding. You're just defining some variables in that equation, and that's the same thing with AI packages. Most of the time, the default package templates will work for your use cases. You just got to know how to mess with these things. But I do want to show you guys how to mess with this stuff as well for when you get more advanced, and I'll show you quickly how to do it in here during this tutorial, but we're not going to go in depth in this because this is incredibly complicated, the procedure stuff. So let's focus on this right here. So a lot of this stuff you've just got to learn over time, but the reason that we are going to show you how to break free of the template and mess with this stuff is simply for a matter of occasionally you get to a point where it's not clear what something's doing here. That's the only reason we're going to do this in the Basics 101 class. But to start, you can kind of guess what's going on with these if you just look at the names of these. Bethesda's usually pretty good about using names that make sense. So the location in the sandbox package is where they're going to sandbox around. So in this particular case, they are going to sandbox near this Sanctuary Sandbox marker that's in the cell Sanctuary EXT within a radius of 1024. And the unit radius, you'll just learn over time. I believe a character is 128 units tall, so that can kind of give you some reference material as far as how big that space is. So you'll just kind of learn it over time. If you're a Sim Settlements fan, the 2x2 plots are 512 units across, so a radius of 1024 means 2 plots across. So that's a good way to look at it. If you're not into Sim Settlements, the floors, the vanilla floor pieces, the fairly large size ones that you can put down are 256 by 256. So again, that should help you get an idea of what a radius of 1024 looks like. But whenever you click on these particular things, this section over here are the things you can edit. So in this particular case for a location, you can click on this and now you can change the location, and there's all sorts of stuff you can choose. You can choose something like near self, which means the NPC will just do within whatever radius you have set here around themselves. Near editor location would be wherever they were placed in the game to start. Linked reference would be whatever they're linked to, and it can be on a keyword. And if you want to know more about linked references, I did a fundamentals video on that, what I should have launched shortly before this or shortly after it. And this will talk about linked references in particular, but linked references is just a relationship between object references that you can set up. So you can have the AI package pick a linked reference, or use their linked reference rather, and hang out within a radius of it. The near package start location would be at the moment that this package becomes eligible, which could be, whenever they're assigned the package, or if the conditions become true, which I'll show you the conditions in a few minutes here. Or what Bethesda did here, this is actually the method I would recommend least, is the way they did this, which is near a specific reference. Just because I personally like to make my AI packages when I've made them to be as universally useful as possible, so I just don't have hundreds and hundreds of one-off AI packages to do a single thing. But this is a totally legitimate way to do it. It works, and it can make it very simple. Like you can see, Bethesda did a lot of this for their main quest stuff, where they did specific packages for that specific moment. likely because they didn't want to risk that if somebody made an edit to a bigger package later that it would break down their main quest. They probably just didn't want to risk that. It's the same reason I'm telling you not to edit package templates, is because it will then cascade to every other package that's using that template. It's probably why Bethesda created so many for their main quests, but so that's why you might see some of them using a lot of these near specific references, because it's a very specific moment in a quest and they want it to just work. Package data target. I can't think of an example of how to use this, so I can't talk about that, but we'll just skip that for now. I'm sure if you stumble across an example, it'll either be very clear why it's doing what it is, or where it came up with that data, or it'll give you a nice question to ask me in the comments, and I can try and figure it out from there once I have an example to look at. So from there, you can change, first of all, the point that the radius is working from, and then you can change the radius itself. So this, whatever you select from here, is choosing the center point, and then this radius draws kind of a circle around there, and it tells the NPC, hang out within that circle and interact with different things. So then a lot of this other stuff has to do with what things they're interacting with, because the general concept of a sandbox is pick an object, hang out around it, and interact with random things. Unlock on arrival, excuse me, has to do with doors. So it can basically be if you've got an area with, pardon me, if you've got an area with locked doors that you want the NPC who lives there to be able to unlock them, then that's going to be how that would work. I don't think that tends to get used much in Fallout 4. I think that was a bigger thing in Skyrim, where you had people with their homes at night. It might be used in Fallout 4 more than I'm aware of, but I don't tend to play. I don't tend to do a lot of sneaking around stealing things in Fallout 4 like I do in Skyrim, so I'm not positive on that. But that would basically just, when the NPC arrives in this location, they'll unlock any doors that they need to. Allow eating would be if there are chairs or seats that support eating, then they will be allowed to use them. So there are certain animation markers that will cause the NPC to pull out food and start eating it. So if you want them to be able to do that, you leave that true. And again, it's just either true or false. So if you uncheck this, it changes to false. That means they won't do that anymore. So if you don't want them to ever sleep in the area they're at, if they find a bed, and their AI package is set up to allow for sleeping, then they would do that during the hours that they're set up to sleep. But generally, you just leave all of that to true if you just want them to generally sandbox in an area. Allow conversation if you want them to specifically just work on objects and don't randomly talk to people. So allow conversation generally would be things like, I believe this affects the player, but I'm not positive, but I think this is generally designed for those random conversations that you'll see NPCs having between each other. So using our example from when I was in game just now, I think it was even happening when I started the video that Sturgis and Mama Murphy were having a little chat between each other, and that having allow conversation set to false would mean while this package was active that they wouldn't be able to do that. Idle markers. So there are two types of markers that NPCs can use. There are idle markers and furniture markers. The hammer happens to be a furniture marker, and you can figure out which type if you were to go into the CK. So I can look at this thing here. If you double click on it and go to edit base, it will bring it up. Generally, those blue guys there are all furniture, but you can see up in the corner it says furniture. And then idle markers are actually going to be an eye on the ground, and you can see that those are all over here. These are going to be your idle markers. And they kind of do the same sort of thing, which is just make the NPC play some sort of animation. But furniture markers tend to be much more specific, whereas idols tend to be things like stand in a spot and do something on loop. So you'll think like there's smoking idols, there's stand guard idols, whereas the furniture often feel like they're interacting with something in the world as opposed to just standing still. But that's not always the case. There's, like you can see, there's this furniture marker for standing guard right over here. So I don't understand fully why there's a difference between them. I know the furniture objects are much more robust in what you can do with them, but why the distinction I couldn't tell you. Like why they didn't just switch everything over to furniture, I couldn't really tell you. I'm sure there's something about this that makes sense and why there are two different things, but just know the idle markers are all going to be indicated by those little eyes on the ground. Furniture tend to be these blue silhouettes. And then so sitting, I mentioned earlier that sitting doesn't mean sit down in a chair. It means interacting with the furniture and doing whatever the animation is. So that's what sitting is. And that's how I turned it off with these. I just said stop sitting, which basically tells them don't use furniture anymore. Allow special furniture. Some of the furniture objects have a keyword on them called special, and if you make this false, they're not supposed to be able to use that, though I have found plenty of examples where they do continue to use it. So it might be that special furniture, this is an obsolete flag that's not used anymore, or it doesn't actually correspond to that keyword. But I just unchecked both to make sure that they would not sit, because I just didn't want them to use that darn hammer thing. Allow wandering. Wandering is a kind of an expensive part of AI. So wandering would just basically be go ahead and pick a random direction within your little circle and take a walk. So by default, the way Sandbox works is they don't just wander aimlessly. They will look within their sphere, or circle rather, and it is technically it's kind of a sphere because of the height that's allowed. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it's basically like a circle with a height. So I guess it's a cylinder is what it actually is, as opposed to a sphere. So they'll look within their cylinder they're allowed and pick a furniture object that they are allowed to use. So to look at this type of stuff. So if you have sleeping is false, then it would ignore beds within their cylinder, and it will pick one at random, and they'll wander over with the intention of interacting with that, and they'll just keep picking new ones every X amount of seconds, however often the AI is set up. And I think the frequency that they recheck when they're in sandbox mode, I believe that is a global variable that's configured, but somebody might correct me on that. And what wandering does is it says, in addition to being able to jump between different furniture markers or idle markers and use them, you can also just aimlessly pick a direction and wander in it. And that tends to be disabled by default because it is expensive. It would make the AI have to make arbitrary decisions about that and then follow the nav mesh and then update. So I think this is an expensive behavior, and it's why it tends to be disabled by default. Energy, I don't know how this is actually used. It might have that might actually be determined as far as that might be tied to how long they sit in a particular animation before they move on. That might be how energy works. This is one of those things. I'm going to point you guys to the Skyrim section of the creation kit, because it has way more information on how package stuff works than the Fallout 4 section. So if you want to read about, I know it does have something about energy, it's not coming to me right now, and I've never found this to be particularly important, so I don't mess with it. Use owned refs only. So this will make a lot of sense in workshop mode, but outside of that, it's a little less clear. But basically, any object in the game can be owned by a faction or a specific NPC. So when you have used owned refs only, it will basically say, don't just use random things you find in the world, use the things that belong to you. And this is a good way to control things. If you think about something like the NPCs in Diamond City at the shops, there are furniture markers that those NPCs are standing at. So if you think about like Mo at the Swatters, where he just stands there and he's got the bat over his shoulder, that's actually a furniture marker, and he will stand there and hold the bat. Well, that furniture marker is owned by him, and that way other NPCs don't come along and try and use that. Well, what this flag does is basically say, like, yeah, you might find some unowned markers around you, some idle markers or things, but don't use those. Only use the ones that are directly linked to you. So in the case of Sanctuary, they've got most of these set up, the hammer ones at least. And I didn't click on the right one here. Let me grab this guy here and show you this. If you go to the ownership tab, you'll see it's owned by the Minutemen faction, which means that anybody in the Minutemen faction is considered an owner of that, and so they can use it while this flag is set to true. So that would be another way we might be able to approach this. Rather than deleting these, we could remove the Minutemen faction as the owner, and since the AI packages are set to true here, then the Concord 5 would no longer use those. But then what would happen is then all sorts of random settlers would start using them, so it would kind of backfire there. The travel preferred path. This means, so the way Sandbox, the default Sandbox package is set up with the package template, the sequence is this. First, they will travel to this location, because if you give them a Sandbox package and they're outside of that cylinder, they're not going to be able to do anything. So the general Sandbox package templates are designed for, hey, anytime you find yourself outside of your cylinder, go travel there. And so what this travel preferred path means is that you should stick to main roads effectively. So rather than wandering off to the like going across the land, they will try and follow roads. is how that work, as opposed to just making a beeline. And now I don't recall how it has to do on the nav mesh screen. You can actually see where preferred paths are. I don't know that, but we're not going to get into that right now. That will be a whole nother tutorial. But that basically, you're saying if you want people to just make a beeline, you want to uncheck this. You don't want preferred path to be true. But if you want them to follow a nice path, then you can check this in and they'll tend to follow the roads. Restrict sandbox targets. So like I said, generally they're going to stick within their cylinder. They're going to look for random targets. And this, you can change what kind of targets those are. So if we go ahead and click on this, this is a tough screen to make use of, in the sense of it's slow and it's not always clear what you should be selecting. So some examples of this can be kind of obvious in here. We talked about linked references before with the location. You could set it up so that they only use a linked reference that they're set on. You could make it so that they only use a specific reference. But then in those cases, it kind of feels like, well, why bother with the sandbox then if you're just giving them a specific thing? So that to me doesn't make a lot of sense. This to me makes the most sense with it. The other one that makes a lot of sense would be keyword. And the ways you might use these are, if you pull down this object type, you can see something like, okay, you only want them to use a bed, for example. Furniture chairs doesn't really make a lot of sense to give them the use of that, because anything, even like those hammer markers, that technically counts as a chair. So I don't know why you would mess around with this for this particular thing. I think the more common way to use that is with keywords. So you could basically arrange for, so if certain furniture had keywords on it, which a lot of this stuff does. In fact, let me open up this hammer icon. I believe this probably has some, I know they all have keywords on them, but I'll show you where the keywords are and what they look like. So if we, I'm going to grab the right one there. So much stuff here. Let's edit the base on this. And you can see that there's a bunch of different keywords here. So what you might want to do would be to limit it to keywords. And then, for example, you could go tag a bunch of your custom furnitures with specific keywords. Or in the workshop packages, what you'll find is that they have, there's divided into furniture class work and furniture class relaxation. And so then your package target, you might set the keyword to only be work or only be relaxation, so that they will only use that type during a certain hour of the day, for example. And then allow height difference. This determines kind of the height of the cylinder. So 150 is not particularly tall. Basically what that means is so when the NPC is standing on the ground and they're searching for a target, they're going to look generally within the same plane they're on, which is why you'll find that NPCs don't tend to sandbox up to things way above them. And you will find mods that's strictly all they do for settlers is they'll go in and modify that height so that they can search high as well. So I think that is much like the wander thing, is generally set low for the sake of keeping CPU usage down on trying to find out what settlers should be doing, because AI is one of the more expensive things, and it's actually one of the things that gets sacrificed quickly in the game. So one thing that we found in the settings, in the default gameplay settings, is that in any given area, only 45 NPCs will be given priority in their activities at any given moment. And so it's one of those things that you'll tend to find that Bethesda is very conservative with it for good reason, is that they want to make sure that things function fairly well in the game and that you don't have these moments, especially in combat, where NPCs are just standing around doing nothing. So you'll tend to find that most default AI packages are pretty conservative, and you should probably stick with that just for the sake of if you're planning on releasing that. If you're doing it for your own use, then whatever your system will handle, go nuts. Just know that the looser you are with your packages and what you allow them to do, especially Sandbox, the slower the AI is going to chug along. So for the most part, you're going to be, when you're first starting, you're going to be taking existing packages and then either creating your own copies of them and tweaking them, but you're rarely going to make your own. But I did want to show you guys how to unlock this section. And the reason for that is you might not be perfectly clear what something in this list is going to do on a package. So if you ever want to see what it does, what these things do, if you change this to, just remember which one you were on, because you might want to switch back to it, and switch it to none. It suddenly leaves all this stuff in place, but it frees up all these sequence procedures so you can see how they relate. So if you click on a procedure, now like I said, I'm not going to go over how to create custom ones of this because it's very complicated, but I just wanted to show you enough to where you could get the information. You can see that these things match. So what it is it'll be in any particular one of these procedures, is, and I think on the no, it's just the procedures. Okay, good. So the description tells you what it is, and then on the value over here is pointing to which of these things up here in the public package data that it's getting its piece of information from. So this won't necessarily help you until you understand packages more and you've had more experience with them. But if you're just like, if something's just not clicking for you, you can try unlocking this by changing it to none, going to each of these procedures, and you'll see how each of these relates to each other. So often Bethesda tends to use the names from the actual procedures right in their in the public package data, so it's pretty straightforward. But you'll find occasions where that's not the case, or if you're trying to dissect an AI package from a mod, it might not be the same way. So then once you're satisfied with that, one thing to note, you could, once you get more advanced, you could just take away the package template and just edit from there and create your own fully custom package. But I tend to like to use the default ones just because this stuff is immensely complicated. Creating working sequences that will cover all corner cases is going to be a challenge. You can just switch it back and then it will once again work correctly. So that's how you can get access to figuring out what the heck some of these names are talking about. All right, so now let's go to the next tab, the flags tab. So this is a pretty useful one for getting certain behavior. So some of the most common behavior that I've had to use are, especially when doing the Conqueror mod, which is very focused on raiders and combat, is I often like to check in the weapon drawn packet flag. And basically what that means is the NPC, while doing this particular package, will keep their weapon out when they can. It doesn't make sense to do so maybe when using furniture, and they won't. But when they're kind of wandering around between their sandbox packages, or if it's not a sandbox package, if instead it were a travel package, which just means like walk from one point to another, then they would have their weapon out while they're doing it because of that particular flag. So each of these flags will do something like that, and you can kind of gather what they'll do. Always sneak. They're going to go into stealth mode. Must complete means that the package will not continue until they finish it. I haven't found any uses for this. I'm sure there are some default ones. And if anything, I would think that this would actually have the potential to break a character, where they'd get into a state where they just can't do what they need to, and then they're never going to be able to get out of their package. And part of this, one of the things with AI packages that we haven't talked about, and it'll except probably in, I'm trying to think where I've talked about it. I feel like I've talked about this briefly, but not in any insane depth, is the way the package stack works. But I feel like that's too complicated for this first stage. So we'll get into that later. Probably when I tie in AI packages back to the questing, I'll talk about the package stack and how that works. But I would tend to avoid must complete. Allow swimming. This is a good one. Again, if you're going to have something where you want them to travel, and we were talking about that preferred path, where if you set the preferred path to false, they'll make a beeline. Sometimes it's useful to allow swimming, just to make sure that they can get from point A to point B no matter what is going on in the world. So if you think about something like if you want an NPC to get from Spectacle Island onto the mainland, you would need to make sure they have a package that is allow swimming. Ignore combat will mean that they're not going to pop off into their combat packages in the middle of doing something important. So ignore combat tends to be used for either NPCs that are meant to be cowardly, or you also have to consider that an NPC doesn't necessarily need to be a character that would be in that would engage in combat. Any type of computer controlled NPC might be considered an actor, and they might need an AI package to do something. So for example, if you had like a robot that was supposed to be not necessarily like a combat robot, but say it was like a minecart that was a robot, and it was just supposed to go back and forth between two locations, it doesn't have any way to engage in combat. So you might check in and ignore combat so that it doesn't ever try and run away. It'll just stay on its track going back and forth. That's not a great example of something that's in game. I couldn't think of anything offhand, but ignore combat I have found plenty of uses for, especially when I'm doing quest work where I'm trying to do a particular scene where an NPC does exactly what I want them to. Then ignore combat is a great flag. Same with no combat alert. You would kind of tend to use those in tandem with each other to make sure that the NPC doesn't pay attention to combat in any way. And then so you can also do preferred speed so that you can make them operate at a particular speed. This is very, very useful. This stuff over here tends to all have to do with random speaking. So all this stuff over on the right here, with the exception of load into furniture. This would be things like, so there's a lot of random dialogue that's just controlled arbitrarily by the game. That just happens at random points. So hellos to the player would be when they get close to the player, they'll say hello without the player needing to press, an activate key. Random conversations, we talked about that earlier with having random conversations with each other, for example, Mama Murphy and Sturgis. Greek corpse behavior, there are lines where the NPC will just see a dead body and make a comment about them, things like that. So this stuff all the way here on the right, with the exception of load into furniture, has to do with speaking. Load into furniture, this is something, so the way that AI tends to work in the game is when you first load into a cell, the game will quickly behind the scenes try and take every actor and put them into a furniture for their particular AI package. So if their package would allow for furniture, what this will do is it'll make it sure as you load into that cell, you arrive there, or even if you're not arriving there as the player, but when that cell loads. So if you're familiar with the way Bethesda games work, is as you're walking along, and the next cell will load before you get there, so that way you don't have things popping in front of you, is that as soon as a cell loads with an NPC, if their package has loaded into furniture, they will start loaded directly into that furniture. And that can be really useful for certain things. So for example, like the pilots of vertibirds, they will have a package that loads them into the furniture so that they're not just standing there, because there is no animation to climb in and be the pilot. So they need to load, they need to appear into the game world loaded in. Can also be useful for things when you expect the player to teleport into a space and you want the NPC to start out directly into the animation of the furniture. The big example I can always think of that makes sense for it is the vertibird pilot. It's just a simple example of where it wouldn't make sense otherwise. Okay, so then so flags, I think a lot of this stuff is pretty self-explanatory. You can just kind of tweak and play around with these. You'll see different examples where some of them are turned on and off. So the last tab I want to talk about is the conditions section. And this allows you to determine whether or not this package is active. And the reason for doing that is generally going to be related to the package stack. We're not going to get into that yet, but it might be that you have, if you just think about it from the perspective of if an NPC has multiple AI packages and you want them to do different things under certain conditions. So maybe, you want to set up something as simple as, during certain hours of the day, you want them to do one thing, and then during other hours, you want them to do something else. That can also be done with the schedule tab, which you could, if you look at it, you'll see it's very simple to follow. But the idea with the conditions is generally you set up various conditions, and as long as these are true, this will be the package that they're using. And for a lot of them, you'll find with Bethesda's, they're based on quest stages. So in this case, as long as this particular stage is done, looks like when Preston arrives at Sanctuary is 1, so that's true. But before Sturgis's quest is complete, well, so that equals 0, they're going to, and they're not yet assigned to something, the player didn't assign them to something, is what this is saying, then this package is valid. They should be able to use this one. So you can set up conditions in here, and the condition system is crazy complex. If you've gone through various of my series, you'll have seen different condition uses. It's one of those things where it's unlikely I will ever get through, it's guaranteed I'll never get through showing all of the potential conditions. Conditions are, if you're ever curious about them, again, I would point you to the Skyrim section of the creationkit.com. It has a lot of those documented, so you can understand how to use those different conditions if you're looking for a particular way to get an NPC or a package or anything else conditioned in a certain way. That's where I would send you to look. So conditions, basically, as long as all of the conditions evaluate to true, this is a valid package for that NPC and they can use it. And if any of them is false, then the NPC will not use this particular package. So that's useful if you're going to apply multiple, and that under certain circumstances you want it to be enabled, and other circumstances you don't. So that should cover some of the basics. Hopefully this gives you guys enough information to start playing around with AI packages, maybe tweak some vanilla ones just to experiment and see how that changes things. Maybe make copies of these packages of a package to reuse for your own use case. But this is again a really deep topic. Once we start talking about package stacks, we start adding in scripts to trigger things, conditioning, making your own sequences. It's just such a deep system. It's really powerful and it lets you do virtually anything you want with the NPCs. And I have not dug into it as deep as I'd like personally, but I am going to take you guys as far as I've gotten, and then hopefully by that time, or by the time I'm ready to come back to this particular lesson series, I'll have learned a lot more as I continue to make more advanced things with the creation kit. So guys, if you have anything more you'd like me to cover in AI packages, I have a little bit of a plan of where I want to go with this to show you guys some stuff, but I don't have it concrete. So if you have specific things you're looking to do with the AI and you want to know, definitely comment below and I'll try and add that to my list to cover in this particular series.